Shalom, bitches. My is here at NFY bringing you When Deathworlders Meet, Parts 8 and 9 by Andrew's second account.
Human from Lost Sanity, meet the Night Beast from Nyx. You may now kill each other.
No. She wasn't some night beast, not at all. Just a woman, a farm girl really, with a meaningless title. An unimportant woman, hardly worth mentioning, actually. Aranis silently cursed the warden as the creature, this man named Human, blindly searched for her. She tried to secret herself into a corner of her cage with as little sound as possible. It didn't work. She could see the man's eyes tracking her, honing in on her hiding spot. Like the others, she doubted it could see without the sun. But that seemed to make little to no difference. She made almost no sound, but it could hear her moving. Maybe even breathing. She felt sure of it. The damned thing came from a place called Lost Sanity, too. With a name like that, the place could have been some fantastic underworld from an epic poem where beings don't need sight to see. For the first time in weeks, her rage had fully given way to fear. She heard the cage opening, the clockwork engines deep within cycling. At any point from the time she had arrived in this cursed dungeon until now, she would have prayed for the cell to open. Now she fervently prayed for it to remain shut. "What the hell is a night beast?" the human asked, his eyes sightlessly shifting to the winding hinge. She gulped. It wasn't her. No, definitely not. No way. She began to wonder if one of her skeleton friends maybe could cover for her. Roddikther? Fjernli? Twindegard? Anyone! None volunteered.
Traitors, all of them. Your doom, shouted the warden.
Doom! Doom! If they fought and she actually ended up killing this man, it would be an absolute miracle. Strikes to the head like the one she just delivered would have laid them all low to a woman, if even for just a moment. That huge man hadn't even lost his footing. She was hardly his doom. A better descriptor might have been more difficult than average sparring dummy.
She's a carnivorous killing machine with razor-sharp teeth, massive claws, and a taste for intelligent meat. We'll see who survives.
All technically true, but really. What the fuck? Screamed Human, banging on the door with lightning-fast punches. From across the room, she could feel each impact in her bones. She didn't want to be anywhere near this creature. You want me to fight some animal? What is this? Some kind of gladiator blood sport? Why would you do that? What? I'm a simple man. A small defenseless herbivore. You're just going to feed me to it? Why? I'll have no chance. It was bargaining. Or it knew she was listening, and hoping to lull her into complacency. Either way, she was highly skeptical.
Ha! It's not any bigger than you, said the warden. You might stand a chance.
Jesus Christ! Mountain lions aren't any bigger than me either! Human yelled back. When I get out of here, I'll fucking kill you, slaver scum! And now she wanted to be his friend. That might be easier said than done. Sure, she could just march right up to the gentleman, introduce herself, explain herself and her terrible mistake, and hope for the best. It might work. The second rule of being taken prisoner was to find allies and unite with your fellow prisoners around the common goal of resistance and escape. They certainly had a common enemy, and the gentleman was surely intelligent enough to see that. On the other hand, this man could be extremely dangerous, and might not even be in his right mind, if the name of his homeland meant anything. Not only that, but she could clearly see and smell that she'd drawn first blood. Though she would seek forgiveness, he need not offer it, and without it, he was entitled to strike her down. And at that moment, he seemed rather angry. Aranis pushed all fear and doubt aside. Only cooperation would lead to salvation. She took a deep breath and drew herself up to her full height, and slowly strode toward Human. They were not going to fight for this sadist's amusement. They were going to clear this up like the lady and gentleman they were. She would first work up the courage to introduce herself to Human, and together, the pair would find a way out of this mess. For the first time since being taken, she felt a glimmer of hope.
"If you get out of here, you can come find me, Human,"
said the warden from the wall.
"I think the beast stalking toward you right now will have something else to say about that."
In a flash, it turned from the warden's voice and looked her right in the eyes. She froze. Shit! Had I been playing blind? Not if I kill you first, you son of a... Wait, no! Stop! My name is Aranis of Caramount, daughter of... And the world went white around her as she fell to her knees. She couldn't breathe. She had to vomit, but couldn't gag. Her hands flew to her throat as she gasped for air, frantically trying to roll away from Human as the looming man stalked toward her. She hadn't even seen what had happened. He had moved so fast. It had hit her hard in the throat, either with a punch or using its hand like a knife to jab or slash. It hadn't have been as effective as a clawed kick might have been, but it had struck faster and would be no less deadly if it happened a second time. Regaining her bearings, she began scooting backside away from the man. With one hand, she searched for bones and pulled herself along. With the other side, she massaged her almost useless throat. With her legs, she used one to push herself away, holding the other aloft but ready to kick out at Human's torso. Please, she tried to croak, rubbing her throat, imploring the lunatic man. Stop! It danced around her, clearly wary of her clawed foot. She struck out, barely tearing its silk tunic as it dodged. She had been taught never to hit a gentleman, but she would definitely make an exception in his case. It pushed toward her from the side, and she moved back in equal measure. It hurt to breathe, and she was fast running out of room to maneuver. She kicked again, and it dodged just as quickly. My name? Aranis, she wheezed again, her words sounding strangled. She had to explain that she was a person, damn it, not some beast. Daughter of Lady Jerusalica. This time the man lunged with his arm. She kicked at it and missed. She barely spotted the man's other arm as it tried to catch her foot. She rolled in place, bringing that extended foot to the ground, while her other foot spun up to take its place, tearing deeply into the man's forearm. It barked in rage. She scooted back another 2 paces. Dame Commander, she choked. What madness had come over this thing? Did it just like killing things? In her Imperial Majesty's order. She had slid away right into a corner. The man had planned it that way, and she had played right into it. She was just another cornered animal fighting for her life. Another lunge, another kick in response. She was ready for when he tried to catch her foot again, and kicked up with her other leg. This time, she missed. The human had caught her by the second foot, his other hand quickly grabbing her leg by the hock, seizing it firmly in place. In an instant he rolled to the ground, keeping his body on the side of her immobile leg, stopping her from kicking out with either. He fell atop her, releasing her leg as he landed. He rolled her chest first onto the ground, while she alternated between elbowing his ribs and stomach and using her fists to hammer at his thighs. Setting all decency aside in desperation, she tried to grab and tear at his manhood, but he kept his hips placed firmly against her buttocks, leaving no room to strike. She tried another tactic, pushing herself off the ground. That only made things worse. Using the gap between her body and the floor, the man wrapped one arm around her entire body beneath her bosom, locking her arms to the side, crushing her torso into his. She began throwing her head backwards, fighting with every little scrap of energy and whatever tools she had left at her disposal. She felt gratified when the back of her head made contact with the man's odd nose, feeling it crushed as it made a soft crackling sound. It was odd. She had always enjoyed hand-to-hand combat. Were she not facing a certain and swift death, she might have admitted to finding the sensations of a hot-breathed gentleman holding her tightly, pressing his body into hers from behind, to be mildly concupiscent. She normally preferred her gentleman to not be so forward, however, and not quite this big. It said. The imp! The imp was gone! It had stopped translating his words, so it must not be translating hers either. That's why they couldn't understand each. The man's second arm joined the first, this time sliding up to her neck. The first hand then moved from below her bosom to her forehead, preventing her chin from guarding her throat. With a roll, he was beneath her now, with both of them facing the ceiling. His legs snaked around hers, holding them down. He pressed in tight against her throat with his bleeding forearm and thick bicep, almost like a piece of wrought iron trying to remove her head. Her sight began to flash white again, this time starting at the edges. She could barely breathe as it was, but this was something else. An excruciating pressure built inside her skull. She was going to die in mere moments. Her soul would wander from star to star. She wanted to make peace with the Almighty in her last seconds, but she could only think of fighting. Fighting against this man-beast named human. Pointless. Sure, she was caught by surprise, but she honestly thought she would have stood a better chance. Instead, she was little more than a stupid slashing dummy, not even a proper sparring partner for him. Sparring! Sparring! She immediately stopped all fighting and went limp, slapping his arm at her throat 3 times. Her vision was fully white now, and she could not see. She could barely feel anything of her body beyond the arm that was at her throat. Would it understand? This was just a translation problem, right? This man had to be intelligent, not a killer or a monster or a lunatic. Had to be. In her final fading moments, she slapped his arm slowly, firmly, deliberately, 3 more times. After the 3rd time, something happened. She could barely tell that the pressure on her neck was gone, and her body had been shifted gently to the floor. Something soft had been placed under her head. The gentleman was no longer pressed against her. Though blurred, her vision began to return. She stared at the ceiling and blinked tears from her eyes. Human was crouching above her. Okay? It asked. My name is Lady Aranis of Karamast, she barely managed to whisper. Daughter of Lady Jerusalem, Dame Commander in Her Imperial Majesty's Order of the Sacred Guard. And I am not an animal. Aranis's head fell to the side as she lost consciousness. She could see the stars, the blinding lights only visible on a cloudless sky. She traveled to one and held it in her hand. A beautiful crystalline incandescent light. It shifted and twisted like a candle's flame in all directions at once. She watched it twinkle for a moment before releasing it. She flew to another and held it too, examining it. It felt larger and softer, but like the other, she did not recognize it. Releasing it, she searched for one that could show her spirit the way home. None of them looked the same, not from here. She could identify no constellations at all. Not the 2 suns, not the huntress, not Insect and the Pauper. The land looked different from the mountaintop when one only stood in the valley. So it was when one looked at the stars while amongst them. She found one that felt familiar, one that might be able to lead her soul home to rest. Reaching out to touch it. Hey, Aranis! Don't fall asleep on me! What? She squeaked when she saw the man kneeling above her and tried to scoot away, only to be reminded that she was still backed into a corner. She needn't have worried, it seemed. The large man looked concerned, apologetic even. His crumpled little nose and blood-stained lips made him seem even more sincere. "Son of the Almighty, Aranis! I'm sorry, I thought you were going to kill me. If it's any consolation, I probably would have just choked you out." She rubbed her head and moaned. "You did choke me out." Yeah, again, sorry about that." "It's all right," she whispered with a half-hearted smile. She offered him her hand, only to see him flinch. "I won't hurt you again. You know my name. Tell me, what should I call a young gentleman such as yourself?" "Lieutenant Colonel Stephen McLaren," he said softly, placing his hand in hers. "I'm not that young." She thought she had known at least part of his name from when the file warden had spoken, but apparently she was wrong. It seemed he wasn't called human after all. Of course, she wasn't called Night Beast either. She gently brought his hand to her lips and licked the back. She may have held on to it a moment longer than courtesy allowed. Okay, thank you," Stephen said, withdrawing his hand. "Nice to meet you." "I'm honored and delighted to make your acquaintance, my gentleman," said Aranis, pushing herself into a seated position against the wall. "Okay, so you're not going to kill me, and I'm not going to kill you, right?" Stephen asked. Aranis felt genuinely offended. "I would never harm a gentleman," she said, literally turning her nose up at the notion. "Well, my head and nose seem to disagree," said Stephen. The imp never gave inflection in its voice, but she could tell from his expression and the tone of Stephen's barks that he was making sport of her. She risked a playful slap at his tummy. It felt oddly firm for a man. He didn't seem to mind either. "And there's this. Huh, deeper than I thought. No wonder I'm still lightheaded." Stephen held up his right arm in front of her. Blood dripped from his elbow, freely landing warm and wet over her thighs. She had cut him deeply, no doubts about that. Without thinking, she grabbed his arm tightly to close the slash wound and tore the remnants of her wool chessum from her chest. It was little more than a broad necklace at that point anyway. Stephen didn't pull away as she bound it. "That's..." He opened and closed his hands a few times, seeming satisfied. "Pretty good." He turned to her and smiled. His mouth opened as if to say something, but silently gaped instead. She watched his eyes roam over her from top to bottom. "I didn't notice when we were fighting, but you're naked," he said. "Very naked." She glanced down, knowing her eyes couldn't tell her anything she didn't already know. Slowly, almost defiantly, she moved a hand to cover her groin. All this time she hadn't thought about it, but she'd been completely undressed. When they took her, she had awoken with almost all her clothing gone, a small fortune in leathers and furs. Gone were her jerkin, trousers, and fur coat. She had been left with nothing but her undergarment. After a time, even that had been turned into bandages, or simply washed to pieces. The last of which she had just given to this man without a second thought. She was as naked as any of the monsters here. She hadn't really been bothered by her nudity until this very moment. Somehow the presence of this odd man reminded her that the world hadn't been turned on its head, that civilization still reigned on the Almighty's earth, and she had at no point abrogated her need to comport herself in a proper and dignified manner. On the other hand, she was a tortured prisoner, lucky to be alive and in no position to be concerned with covering her shame, when mere survival should be her biggest concern. Shame on him for pointing out something so trivial. "I have nothing to be ashamed of," she replied indignantly. "What's the matter? Have you never seen a woman before?" "I Well, sorry. I just meant that... Hold on. He unclasped his tunic's long-toothed fastener that ran from the top of its neck to the midsection, and stepping out of it. It looked to be clean, save for the bloody section at the right arm, and made of remarkably fine construction. Underneath, he wore a set of soft-looking long underwear. "My gentleman, you needn't disrobe to your undergarments on my behalf," she hissed, reaching out to stop him. She was in far too feeble a condition to do much more than stall him. Had she been in perfect health, things might have been different. He shoved his tunic into her bosom. It smelled thickly of sweet blood. Yes, but also sweat and musk. It was not entirely unpleasant, but made her uncomfortably hungry. "Here, take it," said Stephen. He shrugged. "Or don't. But then you'll just distract me." The corners of her mouth began to creep up. She couldn't tell if he was joking or serious. Either way, it made her smile a bit. She grimaced as she began pulling the garment on. Agony racked her entire body with each movement. He took note of the trouble she was having and began to help her. To add to the indignity of losing in single combat to a man, and doing so wearing little more than what the Almighty gave her on the day she had been born, she was having to rely on him to dress her. Using one of her own claws, he cut open the hems at the legs of his garment, the better to fit her large feet. Sliding it on past her buttocks, he helped her arms inside, fastened it up, and patted her side softly. "All set," he said. It could have been worse, she supposed. Pretending he was her personal servant made it a little easier, which she noted as she felt the fine fabric decorated with sigils and coats of arms, was definitely not the case. This gentleman was nobody's servant. "Have you a title?" she asked him, admiring one of his sigils. "I thought I heard you mention one." Like yours, Dame Commander?" "Yes, from your inflection when we made introductions. I gathered you were Stephen of House McLaren. I thought Lieutenant Colonel might be a title." "The short answer is no, milady. But, how about we talk about this later?" he said quietly. She followed his eyes as he looked from the speaking indentation on the wall and back to her. "I have plenty of questions about this place, and I'm sure you may have some questions for me. Perhaps once we get out of here—" She gave a curt nod. Of course, the warden was listening. Here the expression was to be taken literally. The walls actually did have ears. "Can you see in here?" she asked. "None of the other monsters can. You looked blind when you first got here, and now you can see the hole from where the warden speaks." "Well, I can't see it too well at all," he said. "But when I got here, I couldn't see a thing. My eyes needed time to adjust." He leaned close, his body hovering just over hers. "We're going to get out of here," he whispered in her ear. "How?" She breathed into his much smaller one. "We wait. We'll figure out the rest," he said. "But I wouldn't worry." A soft sound came from the far wall, like metal on metal. Both her and Stephen turned to the noise. A small hatch, which she knew from experience to be an embrasure, had opened across the room. With all her remaining, but not insignificant strength, she lunged for Stephen, grabbing him at the midsection and pulling him to the ground next to her. In one swift motion, she climbed atop him, laying flat and did her best to cover as much of him as possible. "Don't move," she hissed in his ear. Moments passed with not a single sound escaping between them or from anywhere else. "Why?" he whispered. She felt his hands move to her sides as if to move her off of him, but they remained in place. Confused, she shifted her gaze from side to side, then slowly turned her head to look up and behind them. The hatch had now closed. "Sorry. I thought they were going to loose arrows at us," she replied softly. She didn't immediately register that she should probably remove herself from the gentleman. She thought it as much his own fault. He should have said something, but didn't for whatever reason. When she did roll off of him, she felt a subtle but distinct loss. After so long with not a single kind interaction or touch from another living soul, it actually felt nice. Stephen, whom she hadn't thought of as anything but her own countryman since she awoke, had just reminded her of what she'd been doing without. Not only that, but just having him with her in confinement as someone of a similar mind and goals, someone to work with, gave her hope. Though a man, he even made her feel safe and secure. "Don't do that again," he whispered. Chagrined and more than a little hurt, she was about to apologize and explain herself when he continued. "You need to save your strength," he whispered. "You're still hurt from our fight, and I can probably take an arrow better than you anyway." Aranis's present condition had little to do with her match with Stephen, from which the pain, breathing issues, and dizziness had largely remitted, and everything to do with her virtually depleted and generally unsatisfactory food supply. She was not recovering her spent energy nearly as fast as she should have been, on top of the fact that she had been terribly weak to begin with. As for who should protect whom, he was still a man, and his arm could attest to the fact that his skin could rebuff arrows no better than hers. She was about to contest to both his absurd notions when she noticed something that hadn't been there a moment before. "There's something on the step of the embrasure," she whispered in his ear, nodding in that direction. "The what?" he replied softly. "The arrow slit, with the hatch," she clarified. He followed her gaze, a questioning finger pointing towards a small concave fixture. She nodded. Standing, he appeared nonchalant as he approached the object, palmed it, and returned to her side. Keeping it close between their chests, they examined it together. Roughly as long as the breadth of her hand, the object appeared to be a cylindrical container of a sort. Trying and opening the pressed-on lid, she extracted the contents, an unnaturally smooth piece of white vellum as long as the container and rolled neatly to fit inside. Unfurling it, she could see a set of simple instructions, like a child's hasty drawings. "I don't get it," Stephen said. "These stick figures, 2 people. I can tell one is you and the other is me. What are these things?" "Arrows, the kind they use here," Aranis replied. She pointed to the third drawing, where both their figures were struck like game. Odd tubular arrows jutting from their backs. "When they hit you, they put you to sleep, except—" She examined the fourth drawing, where their figures were on the ground with the arrows sticking in them. Then the fifth, where the arrows had been removed, but the figures were still on the ground. The sixth had 12 hash marks, time, she supposed, and in the 7th and final illustration, their figures remained unmoved still. "Except this time, they mean to kill us," she finished. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that one. Leave a like if you did. Go ahead and leave a comment if you got something you want to talk to me about. If you want to see more of my stuff, go ahead and subscribe. And if you want my stuff to be showing up in your subscription feed, hit the bell icon on the side. So, planes are annoying as fuck. I live right next to an airport, and basically every 5 minutes I have to stop recording for like 10 to 30 seconds to let the planes fly overhead. And I don't think they're catching up on the audio all that well, but let me know, and I will give them ample time to fly overhead and be gone. Anyways, have a nice one, y'alls.